some great information to share with you over the next 45 to 50 minutes, and we are glad you're here. We've got a full slate of information and some great guests to help us with the content. So before I get into official introductions here, we've got folks from all over the country here. We've got our great senior marketing manager, Kathy Shulkin, who's going to be managing the polls and questions. Our guest, Bruce Potter's in New York, about 25 miles east of Albany. Dave Nagel's in Indiana. I'm here in California. So we're spread out for you. Let's talk a little bit about some upcoming events for the Leadership and Learning Center. This webinar actually leads into the Successful High School Framework from Ideas to Implementation. I'll be there with Dave and our colleagues Jay Trujillo and Tremaine Nelson. It's a 2-day high school summit, and we really think you're going to love that. That's October 30th, October 31st, 2013. We also have Decision Making for Results and Data Teams, our #1 and #2 top-selling seminars. That's going to be with Lisa Sivalak and Dr. Alyssa Pianowski in Dallas, Texas. That's in February. Then Dr. Bloomberg and Dr. Pianowski will again be running the same 2 back-to-back seminars on March 18th and 19th in Los Angeles. Finally, we've got our Leaders Developing Leaders series, and this is going to be done with Dr. Brian McNulty, Dr. Kathy Lasser, and Michelle Moore. For leaders, you're not going to want to miss this one. It's going to be a winner for sure. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dave Nagel. Now, Dave is a Senior Professional Development Associate with the Leadership and Learning Center. And here's the deal with Dave. He's a former middle high school biology teacher, department chair, and administrator, and he's done extensive work in the secondary area, specifically in grades 9 through 12. His former district, the Wayne Township of Indianapolis, Dave accomplished some things with his colleagues, mainly that the graduation rate went from 65% to 83% in almost 5 years, with 20% recovery in graduation based on a fantastic credit recovery program. So Dave's also been authored several times. He's been published multiple times in Principal Leadership and Educational Leadership. I know you're going to enjoy Dave as we get into this. And our special guest is Superintendent Bruce Potter from the Berkshire Union Free School District. Again, that's about 25 miles east of Albany. Bruce is a former high school business teacher, a department chair, an assistant principal, high school principal, and assistant superintendent, along with being a staff developer. I think you're going to enjoy hearing from Bruce as well. We've got a real live practitioner online, so let's take advantage of it and see how they've implemented some of the center's core ideas and some of our very best thinking. So Dave, welcome. Good morning. How are you?
Excellent, Steve. Thank you so very much, and thank you to all the participants today giving up some time. We intend to make this as useful as possible. We've got some great information to share, but please keep the questions coming throughout the webinar and post-webinar. Just sharing with you some data that I think is probably obvious to a lot, but often doesn't quite create the sense of urgency that we are looking for. Study recently done that shows graduation rates in many countries and cities and towns across the United States has not changed a whole lot in the last 20 years. I did want to share with you just a couple of points, and this sometimes becomes trite, but I think it's critical to understand when we talk about economic rates and some of the stimulus going on in the country and the discussion, high school graduation rates drastically impact the economy in each state by itself and then collectively. Just a few numbers to throw out at you looking at the results from the class of 2011. But if we would have moved just approximately 25% more of our graduates up to a diploma who eventually dropped out, that was approximately $5.3 billion in overall earnings, and that includes things such as insurance rates and things of that nature. But I wanted to just stress one other point. That number almost doubles, or actually goes up to over $9 million if those graduates would have completed just 2 years of post-secondary education. And so part of what we have to acknowledge is that while we want to increase the graduation rate, especially with the advent of the Common Core, we have to make sure students in the 21st century have the skills and necessities to be there. And I just want to share with you a great resource. It's called On Track to Post-Secondary Education, which many school districts in the Pennsylvania area have kind of bought into. And what it does is it supports high school counselors to not only help students graduate, but after they graduate, it's a support network for students that have entered their first 2 years of college, and they've had a success rate of about 600 students, and only about 40 of them did not complete 2 years. So as we think about high school graduation, I think as high school leaders we have to also acknowledge it's making sure that we're not just giving them a diploma, but we're making sure that diploma includes the skills and tools that they're going to need to be successful after after they leave high school?
I think it's true, Dave. I think it's in our lap. I mean, we either can prevent it or endure it, and I think we have a lot of tools today that we can share about how we can actually prevent failures and actually increase graduation rates.
One of the things we're going to talk about initially is the need for high schools to just simply have a different structure. In many ways, the teaching and learning isn't any different than it is with our colleagues that are K-8, but the Wallace Foundation did a pretty extensive study, 7 years, looked at every factor that was impacting achievement, and number one was effective instruction. And then a close second was imperative instructional leadership from the principal and or assistant principals. And what they found was at the secondary level there was a drastic gap in the perception of classroom teachers that talked about their leaders focusing on instruction. And so one of the things that we'll talk about here in our high school framework is the need for with a metaphor, a flatter, thicker leadership structure that empowers, that allows for collective, structured, or distributive leadership. And as a final footnote, what they found was there wasn't any one form of leadership that had a higher impact on achievement as long as it was focused on instructional improvements and focusing on the actions that will help students reach their potential, whatever that was.
Super. Well, you know what I noticed with high schools, and this isn't critical on high school folks, but there is a level of autonomy in secondary schools. And listen, sometimes, you know, we've got a lot of private practitioners that just want to close their door and do whatever they want, and isolation is going to be our enemy, especially as we implement the Common Core. I think the more we collaborate, the more we talk about some of the challenges that we face in terms of student achievement or student failure, the better outcome there's going to be. So this gap between reality and intention really has to close, and I think you agree, Dave and Bruce, probably that sometimes the only thing high school teachers have in common is the parking lot. So let's talk a little bit more about what effective collaboration looks like at the secondary level.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve, so much. And you hit on a key point that by structure and by nature, many high schools, including the ones I taught in and administrated in, were set up to be definitely autonomous. Mike Schmoker's quote, which has resonated with me, said a few years back that we will consider it an embarrassment when there's a lack of a professional learning community in schools. Well, Mike is so correct, and he's done so much for our field to offer his insight and his research. But one of the pieces we wanted to stress here a little bit is the need to teach effective collaboration. As an initial administrator, I can say I was very poor in thinking that establishing a data team structure, which is a critical need for any PLC or any collaborative team to have, and to place folks in a room and give them some common assessments, give them some common planning time, and assume that we know how to effectively collaborate. One of the things that we talk about is the difference between standards and norms. And standards are the things that we need to absolutely right the ship, such as being on time, being prepared, being respectful. But it's norms, which by definition are skills that become normal behaviors. And that takes time, that takes practice. And if adults at any level, but specifically secondary, haven't had the time to collaborate with their peers, have honest discussion, not about what they might like or might even what works, but what strategies and actions work the best, we're probably going to shortchange the process.
I agree, and I think the one thing I want to mention to our listeners is there is no better way to increase effective collaboration than through the Center's 5-step definitive process for data teams. Look, we know people have release time for collaboration. It's what they do during collaboration that really makes a difference. And, it's one thing just to talk and collaborate. It's another to follow a systematic treasure hunt for better teacher practices following these 5 steps. So I know, Dave, if anybody has any questions about what this looks like, these 5 definitive steps for data teams, you can email myself or Dave. We're happy to share that information with you. I think it's the key to quality school improvement, and it really shows how teachers can work with each other to prepare students for college in the real world. This is a process I think we can definitely embed.
Sure.
All right,
thanks,
well,
Steve. Steve, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add one short footnote. Gallimore and Saunders from UCLA did a recent study. What they looked at was the impact of collaboration on achievement, and above all, the number one factor was not time or resources. It was following protocols. It was following those procedures. So this isn't something that we can say we think we believe in, but the evidence has told us that. What I'd like to do now is introduce a colleague of mine, a good friend, Superintendent Bruce Potter, who's got some great information to share. I'm excited everybody gets a chance to hear what he's done at Berkshire. So Bruce, thanks for joining us, and tell us a little bit about Berkshire Junior Senior High School.
Well, my pleasure, Dave, and thank you to you and Steve. I'm thrilled to be on the call. Berkshire is an all-boys residential school serving grades 7 through 12. Over nearly 3/4 of all students suffer from poverty, are minority, and classified as special education, the 3 subgroups of students that historically have the lowest achievement levels. We had to change the culture. Students came to us with failed school experience, and that's all they knew. Fortunately, the 90-90-90 schools research tells us that it can happen. We can change a culture, but we need to focus on specific practices by looking at cause and effect data.
Sure. Steve, if we could flash that slide. Thanks so much. Bruce, this is something extremely powerful. I'm excited for you to share with the group. This is your discipline data, and any of us that have been in a high school longer than 5 minutes know that if discipline or student disruption is an issue, academics are going to be put on the back burner. Talk to us about how you've not only changed the culture, but increased your discipline results here and maintained something that is pretty phenomenal.
Well, as you can see, Dave, in the chart, from the chart, in 08-09, we averaged 55 disruptive incidents a month, and there's no learning going on in the classroom when that's the case. We made some changes in program that gained better but inconsistent results. We realized we needed to change our daily practices. We needed to make changes that would sustain behavior but promote student engagement for learning. I've learned and we hear that in order to make such changes, you need to create a sense of urgency. Well, we found the urgency. We had not made AYP in math and ELA. We were corrective action year 2, and we potentially faced a restructuring. And for anyone on the call that may not be familiar with that, it's when the principal gets fired and you eliminate half the staff. We attended the high school summit and took what we learned and began to apply a flat, thick leadership model by focusing on adult actions.
Awesome. If we could flash to the next slide, the other thing, Bruce, that I think is critical, and I've been at your school several times in the last 2 years, not only seeing the results in the students, but just seeing that the staff morale just absolutely be transformed. And often that's the challenge when we go into high schools is we need to improve morale. Well, as you know and you've seen, morale increases when achievement student results increase. Talk to us about how you've sort of used the matrix specifically around improving the effectiveness of the collaboration at Berkshire.
Well, sure. And I think Steve just mentioned it's more than just creating meetings. It's what they do within those meetings that is what's important. So we need to create high-performing teams. And in creating the flat, thick leadership model, it's the teams that we're leveraging to actually do the bulk and the yeoman's share of the work. But we had to begin with a focus, creating meeting norms that we hold with fidelity, but we begin each and every meeting with 3 simple questions. We do a check-in, asking the team member how they're feeling, what is their goal for the meeting, and who can help them with that. It really sets the table for effective collaboration. Research tells us that protocols are what make collaboration effective. So what we did, my principal, Greg Pesos, and I, we've empowered our staff at the team level to impact instruction. We utilize a culture of inquiry. We ask them a lot of questions, but the only response we won't accept is this is the way we've always done it, because then we're going to get the same results we've always had, and that's just unacceptable.
Right, right. Bruce, one other point I just think we need to share is your academic success recently, and as much as it's a success, it's an improvement. Talk to us about how once discipline and those actions got in place, how achievement related to instruction has changed at Berkshire.
Certainly. And I have to commend the staff. Incredibly hardworking people and are truly dedicated to making the changes necessary to impact the students' lives. And anyone on the call, I'm certain it would resonate. When behavior is out of control, it's very difficult to create a learning environment. Specific to that, we have a variety of look-fors. There's certain things that you can measure, test scores, things of that nature. And we have our growth testing that we are seeing. We saw a 7% increase just from one year to the next in the last 2 years with the results of our growth assessments. But one of the look-fors that we're seeing is the level of student engagement within the classroom. Their willingness to take pre and post tests, where before you wouldn't get any answers on a test. But more specifically, and probably our greatest success, is last year we had 12 graduates. To a person, the graduates themselves, they previously considered themselves a dropout. So that, I think, speaks to the results that we're starting to net at Berkshire.
Awesome. Bruce, thanks so much for sharing. And I just got to say, as someone who's been fortunate enough to work with your staff, just to see the change in the level of discussion, and like you said, what was thought of as a potential dropout is now almost expected to be a graduate. And obviously factors come into play that sometimes are beyond our control, but that is not part of the discussion there. Steve, I'm going to turn it back to you, and maybe we're ready for our next poll question, or if anything has come in from the audience that we want to address.
No, we don't have any new questions yet. Dave, I just wanted to spend 30 seconds on the Leadership and Learning Matrix here to help our participants understand what the difference is between cause data and effect data. And I think Bruce realizes this as well. If we really can't measure what we don't monitor, and one of the things we don't monitor very well is what were the adult actions that led to the test scores? In other words, what were those antecedents? Because how can we know what to replicate or eliminate if we don't know if it's working or not? So whenever I work with clients, I know you do this as well, Dave, we show them this matrix and we ask schools, well, what quadrant do you think you're in? Lucky, losing ground, leading, or learning? This is a great activity to replicate with your staff, especially for my superintendent and principal friends online right now. Let the staff help you understand where they think they are, because this is the first step now as we go into school improvement. So any other comments about this particular slide, Dave?
Well, just to the audience, and part of the download of the recent Center magazine was the more detailed story of Berkshire, and while we had to limit Bruce on his time today, but he goes through using all four of these quadrants over the sort of the history and success, and it's a great story, and you're exactly right. When we focus on actions and results at the same time, we have a chance to replicate successes and eliminate future mistakes.
Absolutely.
So at that point, we actually have a question from one of our participants, and perhaps Bruce can address this. They say, it would be great to know exactly how the folks at Berkshire got those results. What specific actions did they take?
Well, there was a variety of things that have gone into it, Kathy, but specifically, and I think our greatest high-yield activity was focusing on student engagement. We have, as basically primarily a special education school, we have a hybrid self-contained comprehensive high school model where the students do switch classes, but they have 2 behavioral assistants in each class. So it's about the adults working together, but what is each adult's role in promoting engagement? So they work in their teams, they commit to specific adult actions, they hypothesize as to what they think is going to work. From the research, what are some of these strategies that have proven effective, and then we try them out here. And through monitoring, that's what they make the decisions at their team level, the types of activities they're going to do more of, the types of activities that they're going to stop doing, because as I mentioned earlier, we're not going to do things because it's the way we've always done it. So we really empower them at the team level to make those decisions on the fly based on the results they're getting.
Excellent. Thank you, Bruce. And then we have a number of questions in regard to antecedents, asking for an additional explanation on how antecedents play into the matrix. Another saying, when we say high understanding of antecedents, exactly what does that mean? And then also one who tried the matrix with their staff, but they were also confused about the antecedents.
Well, I'm going to let Dave take this. I'll introduce the antecedents part. An antecedent is simply a predictor of excellence. So it's determining what those things are that led to the effect, the test scores, the formative assessment results. So just a quick example of an antecedent is, let's look at a losing ground school. These are schools that have no understanding of why they're failing year after year after year. So I think you can see this as highly obvious. They're going to continue to make the same mistakes. That's what we call a low understanding or low antecedent understanding of what it is that's actually not working, as opposed to learning schools that are still getting low results, but they're starting to understand why. And they're making those changes, and so they have less mistakes. I think one of the biggest indicators on this particular matrix is, how do you get to leading? And look, at Lucky's nice. I work in plenty of schools that are lucky. They get very high results, but they don't know why. And the reason why is, many of those students who go to Lucky schools already come to those schools proficient or advanced even before they step foot on that campus. It's very hard for those teachers to determine what they did that led to that result if those kids are already there. Remember, Lucky's nice, but Lucky doesn't last forever. Dave, how do you use information?
Right. Great point, Steve, and I really appreciate whoever the participant was to raise the question. Effect on the left-hand side, effect data is going to be things we're going to be able to measure with students. And while Bruce has brought up one that sometimes gets missed, but discipline data, Regents exams, eventually our Common Core assessment, SAT, anything that we can measure student results, and with rare exception, we're going to measure those in a number or a percent. And I could probably walk into any high school now and say the number of students that are proficient on SAT verbal or your state level assessment for math number sense. We have to do the same thing with the adult actions, because if we don't believe, and John Hattie tells us clearly that it's the actions of the adults, specifically the teachers, that are going to have the greatest impact on achievement, if we don't believe that, then we sometimes kind of have to take a step back when we're looking at our profession with the level of respect we want. So that's monitoring the number of times, as Bruce said, and I've been at his school, he is in classrooms, and there's a focused, high-yield lesson that has engaging activities, and the students have some buy-in. The number of times that we see high-yield strategies modeled and observed correctly, proficiently. So we're going to measure the adult actions almost at the same way we would measure student actions, because we feel if that action is successful and then done with fidelity, we should be able to see the result. So it's monitoring the adults with just as much fidelity and effort as we do the students. So great question, and I think we could do some follow-up with that, whoever responded to that. But this really is the fact.
This is for my friend Rochelle. The very last question was clarify the use between cause and effect. And I'll tell Rochelle right now, and then we've got to move on to the next slide. But cause data is anything that we can measure that adults do, like how much professional development do they have? How much time do they spend teaching writing every day? These are all things that are adult actions, and we try to measure those using some sort of instrument, so we can determine how much time or how much effort is spent on certain areas, and then we compare the cause to a specific effect. Like if we spend more time teaching writing, then writing scores should increase. I'll have to tell anybody else who wants more information on this, just email Dave or I, and we can give you a whole lot more background on how to use the Leadership and Learning Matrix. We think it's a fabulous tool, but we've got to move on to the next slide here. So Dave, tell us what we've got going on here.
Sure. Well, in the interest of time, we've got several important topics that are all part of the high school framework, but when we started putting this together, it was based on high schools are unique, and they're unique because they're more than often the most diverse settings in our K-12 education. So we've got several areas that we'd like to go into today related to Common Core, failure prevention, credit recovery. But what we'd like to do first is if we could just take another minute or two and do another poll and kind of see for the participants today, what are some of your greatest challenges and thoughts, and then that will sort of drive where we go for the next 20 minutes. So all of these are topics we can address, and we might, but we wanted to take just a minute and let the audience interact with us and give us some feedback, sort of on a quick formative assessment of what are some of your most urgent needs. And while all of these might be a challenge, what would you say is the biggest one facing your school currently?
Overwhelming, it's really a challenge to increase student engagement, to keep them interested and focused.
Well, I would say that's perfect, because I believe that's the next slide that we were going to get into either way. So, and we'll do our best to respond to everybody's. See, we got a little bit here on grading practices. So those first two bullet points there are really kind of tied together. And in 2013, I've been using the metaphor, if you aren't starting to get ready for the Common Core, it's the equivalent of December 23rd and you haven't done any Christmas shopping. It's coming, and it's coming soon. And having teachers familiar with the document, familiar with the standards, and the level of rigor changes. But combine that with what we'll call the concept of leverage, where we're looking at how standards and connections students make from one class to the other. A phenomenal piece of data is the high school survey for student engagement from Yazzie Mintz at IU University that has about 50,000 students in the database, and just a couple quick bullet points. About 67%, or two-thirds, say that they're bored on a daily basis. And one of the main reasons, almost half of them say that is due to the material, and it's due to the material not being relevant. And so just quickly thinking about the need to increase engagement and having kids having some choice, but also relevancy from classes. So I'm going to share with you, and this is part of the more detailed description of this is in the handout that will accompany those of you that go to the website for follow-up, but just taking a Common Core anchor standard for writing where students are to write arguments and support claims. Let me just share with you with one high school I was recently with that they were putting in some performance task and engaging performance task work in their school. the science and math teachers got together, and they were focusing on supporting claims. And what the science students did, in biology, were focusing, or I'm sorry, in earth science, on data collected for the risk of possible earthquakes in lower risk areas, and the students had to write a one-page summary or brochure to defend their claim. When they were in the math classroom, based on a mathematical formula, they had to defend or argue in writing a short verbal presentation against money being spent to structurally support buildings that were in low-risk areas for earthquakes. Now, 2 points with this. Number one, both of those tasks are high yield, high levels of rigor, high levels of DOK, and offer students a better chance to connect one course to the other. Just as a footnote, number one, in many high schools, rarely, unless they are true small learning community setups, not every teacher will share students. So in my former high school, I might, as a biology teacher, science teacher, only had 30 or 40% of the students that had a certain algebra teacher, but that was 30 or 40%. There was another chance to have those students have a better chance to make that level of connection and engagement. And I always say we can't focus on the outliers, because unfortunately we could create the most engaging opportunity and task that is relevant with high levels of rigor that some students aren't going to buy into. But the Common Core, because of the writing and just the intentionality to help kids connect their learning from one subject to another. Steve, I want to hear your thoughts on this. And just as a footnote, the students in these two classes, they were getting 2-for-1 credits. So when they were meeting proficiency in one class, that might give them some more points or some more marks in another class, and that alone was something that was getting the kids more engaged, putting forth more effort, and actually connecting learning at a higher level.
Well, you know, and the other thing, since most people talked about increasing student engagement, I think these authentic performance assessments really answer the call here, where, you know, I've seen some great authentic performance tasks where teachers will tell their students, look, your family, your parents just agreed that you can finally get a great iPhone. Now it's up to you to help them understand what is the best plan, service plan for that phone. And then these students have to research Verizon, you know, AT&T, whatever it is, and make a case why they should actually have this service plan for this phone. They've got to do the research. That's engaging. Many students find cell phones and technology extremely engaging. These authentic performance assessments that are designed to, you know, and keep kids engaged are real-life scenarios. And so, you know, again, we have a great system, by the way. The center has one where we show participants how to create 4 tasks that lead up to a culminating authentic performance assessment. And each task is based on an increasing level of rigor. So knowing that we don't have time to go over that completely here, again, I'd be willing to share some of that information. I know you will too, Dave, about how we increase the rigor.
Sure.
And,
absolutely. Steve, if I could, though, just because he's on the call, and Bruce, maybe just in a couple of minutes, because that was the work that we've recently done at Berkshire when I was there last time, maybe if you could just, with broad brushstrokes, talk about how the staff bought into that, what some of the impact has been, because that, I felt, took your staff to another level to help build engagement, but also make sure that there was rigor and standards-based instruction taking place. If you would just talk to us about that for just a minute or two.
I think it was a win-win from a couple of levels. The level of engagement and communication between the faculty, you know, I'm reflecting on that session that you held in the library. They were really brainstorming and getting excited about what they were doing and how they could leverage what they were doing. Immediately the following week, teams were submitting action plans that were inclusive of aligning vocabulary, key concepts from one discipline to the next, and then they were going to be monitoring their implementation of those concepts in skill building for student results. So it had the benefit of really lighting a fire and encouraging them and empowering them at what they do makes a difference and how they can continue to leverage their collaborative work one more way, and it made an impact right at the classroom level immediately.
Right. Awesome. Thanks so much. Steve, if we could...
Dave, I do want to go on to the next one. I've got one question I've got to ask for Jennifer here, who asked about how the Common Core can be implemented into the areas of physical education or art. These specialists, Dave and I call you singletons. Here's how it works. The Common Core now says that literacy is a shared responsibility, not only in English language arts, but in other technical subjects like math, social studies, and physical education. Jennifer, the way you can incorporate the Common Core is to have kids write nonfiction about how to serve a volleyball. How are the rules, what are the rules to softball? So, and what brings you together with the art teacher, if you're PE, is you use the same common scoring guide. What's a 4? What's a 3? What's a 2? What's a 1? You win both ways. They're writing in your content, and they have to write more. And that's the best way you can infuse the Common Core in some of these singleton special areas, really using literacy, because that is huge with the Common Core.
Sure. And just as a footnote there, the speaking and listening standards, which focus on collaboration, responding to diverse perspectives, summarizing points of agreement, disagreement. It would look a little bit different in PE than it would in language arts, of course, but I think that the opportunity is there. Well, just to kind of keep moving with the content, and thank you so much to those of you that are chiming in questions. Just part of the framework that we put together is the idea of upperclassmen readiness. And for decades now, we've known that, as Billy Donegan told us, the freshman year is the linchpin year. And we've known that that is the critical year for students to get off a potential failure. Steve, if you jump to that next slide. The metaphor is getting kids ready for their junior and senior year with the concepts, skills, and in most cases, the credit accrual, so that way they are considered juniors. Steve, if you would just flash to that next slide. Sure. That has the research. Just a few bullet points of common predictors of student dropout. And as a footnote, none of these can be taken to the bank as the only one. But, you know, repeating ninth grade, and John Hattie has told us, ranked 149th out of 150 indicators of student achievement. What has the second most deleterious effects is retention. But looking at that second bullet, low credit accrual, and we're going to spend some time here in the last 10 minutes talking about failure prevention and credit recovery. But when students are entering our high school, what is our system or trigger to know that they have struggled in language arts or math? And as the Common Core comes in with the level of rigors, with the level of rigor that's going to be needed, that's going to hopefully give schools a better indication of who needs more intense support right as they walk into our school and not waiting 4 weeks, 9 weeks, or even into their sophomore school year. The next piece that we just wanted to share here is we start talking about credit recovery and failure prevention, and Bruce highlighted the 90-90-90 research, and one of the correlates is multiple opportunities for success. What happens often in the high school is we can confuse multiple opportunities with a stipulated second chance. And by definition, a multiple opportunity is having the kids demonstrate proficiency on multiple occasions and possibly in different ways. The math Common Core, the standards of mathematical practice, the first one is students will persist and persevere in solving problems. That by definition means we would need to be giving them multiple opportunities, but what can happen is we've all been there where we have situations where the student has either failed, been given multiple chances, or possibly just not done the work. And I'm stealing a phrase that I've stolen from my colleague Steve Ventura, who is on the line. There's a stipulated second chance. And when we think about anything in life, whether we are working towards our driver's license, working towards any type of certification, there is a stipulated second chance. Now, that means you get another opportunity, but there might be a penalty. I wanted to take just a minute and share with you, because I would imagine some of you on the call, if not most of us, have had this comment said to them, but we need to get them ready for college. I just want to share with you a grade policy from an institution that says, I'm going to read this slowly and we'll make sure it's on our handout. In the time interval specified by the instructor, a student who receives a grade of I who successfully completes his or her work no later than the 12th week after the second subsequent semester will receive from the instructor whatever permanent grade he or she would have deserved if that work had been completed on time. And if Steve would go ahead and flash the slide, what I just read for you was the grade policy at Purdue University, which is a highly reputable, research-based, state-level institution. And there are many of these, and I can cite 12, but I use Purdue just because it's probably as well known. But colleges are realizing that learning should be how well students learn it, not always when they learn it. And there is a stipulation. The student has to meet with the professor. They have to work out a plan. They have to put forth extra effort, time, and might even have to pay for a little bit of tutoring. What the university is saying is if the student completes that work 12 weeks after the end of the semester, their learning or their grade should be no less valuable than if they did it on time. And for the students who earned it on time, it's just as fair to them. They have the freedom during those 12 weeks. So Steve, just would love to hear your thoughts on this, because you and I have talked a lot about we don't make it easy for kids. In fact, we make it more difficult, but we provide a path so that way failure is more difficult for the students than not doing the work at all.
Yeah, and I call it the academic death penalty for late work. And I usually ask folks that come to my seminars, I mean, what would you rather have? A student hand in really high-quality work that's 2 days late, or really poor work that's turned in on time? Now, I know what teachers say. I want it both. I want them to turn it in on time. It has to be very high quality. But I think sometimes we use grades as a morality lesson, and that hasn't escaped the notice of a whole bunch of administrators and other educational research think tanks that say a lot of these people are saying that teachers are spending an inordinate time and effort trying to warn, educate, and persuade kids to get ready for college. But the thing about college is that the one thing teachers, lawyers, and doctors all have in common is that they are given multiple opportunities to demonstrate certification, not one time and you're out. So giving a student a second chance isn't going easy on the student. A lot of people hear that, and that's not what we're saying. Because kids don't fear a zero. What they fear is doing the work. And by the way, Dave, you know as well as I do, a zero on sorry about that, a zero on a 100-point scale when you average it is equal to capital punishment. I don't see how kids can overcome an averaged in zero when it's 60 points away from really lousy work, the D. And we all know that the D can sometimes be referenced as the coward's F, but how can a D, which is really, really lousy work, be only 10 points less than average, but not turning in really lousy work is 60 points worse than really lousy work? I mean, here's how you can prevent failure without going easy on kids.
And
yeah, we're just going to...
and to that point, Russ makes the distinction about incompletes being different from failing grades, though. So if we can potentially address that for a moment.
Sure, and actually, I would love to send that gentleman an example of my former district's grade policy, where students who received less than a passing grade, and actually at the junior high level it was 70, at the high school level it was knocked down to 65. The student, and this is the board policy, received an I until, and this is saying that the grades won were based on standards-based assignments, but the student receives an I until he has improved grade to a proficient level or opportunities to improve grade have been exhausted. And the point of the verbiage in that, which we wrestled with, was number one, we want to give kids every opportunity. What does exhausted mean? Well, that's a little bit of a relative term. If students are choosing to not receive the extra help, to not come in, to do those things, yes, their opportunity may be exhausted, but if they're continuing to work, continuing to improve, it behooves us to not invest an extra class, an extra resource to repeat a failure. So, and that's where I actually was turned into not just incomplete, but intervention. And the level of intervention was determined by how far away from proficiency the student was. A footnote there was the teacher who that student left their classroom offered feedback to the counselor of, we might help him earn his credit, but I'm really cautious of entering him into the next level of coursework. So we didn't put students who were not surviving into the next level of chemistry. They could still earn their credit. And sometimes they hadn't earned a credit, but the teacher said, you know, with work they could still maintain in the next level. So there was some dialogue that wasn't all or nothing. It was based on the individual students to give them a chance to earn that credit, but then also know, okay, we will have to do something different if we're going to continue in the curriculum with a student who's behind in concepts or skills. Getting close to the end, one thing we wanted to just address here, and this was something we were want to make sure we had time for, but just some high-yield, implementable failure prevention strategies. And one of those, I'm going to talk just about a couple of these. WIN program just stands for Work In Now. A system in place for when students get behind on assignments, we don't bless them with a zero, and we have some system. But two that we implemented in my former high school that I've seen across the country, just simply having a day where students, there is no penalty, it's an amnesty day, and it's just an opportunity for students to not just make up work, but meet proficiency. And I want to say, we called it an amnesty day. Larry Ainsworth in his rigorous curriculum design simply calls it a buffer. A day where teachers have a chance to catch their breath, a day where students have a chance to catch their breath. And as a footnote, and Steve has shown this as well, my former high school averaged about 94% attendance. And we were a large high school, over 3,000 students. First time we had an amnesty day, it was over 98% attendance. There was some pushback with how many kids came to school, but my question was, did they behave and do their work? And the answer was yes. And so my thought was, kids coming to school behaving and do their work was not a bad thing. So we implemented a policy where amnesty days would happen unannounced. There was a perception that students might wait for the amnesty day. Rarely did that happen. But that was just an opportunity in the curriculum to give students and teachers a chance to catch their breath and not have kids fall too far behind. And then some method of early final exam. I was with a school last week in Lyon County, Nevada that is going to take this on this year because they talked about the horror, in a sense, for teachers and students, the 3 days before graduation and literally the day of graduation, taking final exams where they get no feedback. They're not sure if they're passing. To have a system where students can take the exam early and have those that met proficiency have some enrichment activity, some freedom that they've earned. And let me just say, I have never seen that backfire in a school for students who pass the course early to cause trouble, but then teachers can have the water parted to know who needs some extra attention. And as Steve, you've said many times, it's better to have an exam passed early or course passed early than never at all. And the menu system does that as well. The menu system is simply telling the students up front what they need to do to earn an A, B, C, or D that is highly rigorous, that talks about the level of quality and DOK in their assignments. But if students were to meet those earlier, it gives them a chance to earn their grade much earlier than just the last day when it's sometimes a lack of feedback. So, Steve, any thoughts or comments? Because you've talked a lot about these as well in your work with clients.
You've mentioned Hattie several times, and I'm going to give folks just the reference for John Hattie. John Hattie wrote the book Visible Learning. His last name is Hattie. You've got to take a look at this book because Dave and I refer to it all the time. I mean, John Hattie's book combines over 800 meta-analysis, over 10,000 pieces of research data, and 15 years of research, and he's rank ordered 138 factors that influence student achievement, 1 to 138. So when we talk about the effect size of homework, in John Hattie's book, it has an effect size of 0.29, not very high. In fact, it ranks 88 out of 138. And one of the things John Hattie says in his study about homework is that homework has a greater effect size for students of higher ability versus lower ability. Now, most teachers hear that and agree completely. But if we know that ahead of time, then why wouldn't we differentiate our homework assignments if we know what's going to happen before they actually give the assignment? So these are some of the things that come from Dave and I also do an effective grading policy or effective grading practices seminar, and a lot of that comes from grading practices, which really we think are the key to student improvement. Not going easy on kids. Just want to remind everybody, not going easy on kids, but giving them multiple opportunities to demonstrate proficiency.
Sure. And we are just about out of time.
Kathy, we are. If I can just, for one moment, a number of you are coming up with some additional questions. We will respond to those, Dave, Bruce, and or Steve, individually in emails. We do have captured all your email addresses, and thank you so much for your questions. And the other point I wanted to make is that Dave has also prepared a handout that will accompany the PowerPoint and audio that will be available 48 hours after our webinar ends here. And that will be for further discussion with your leadership teams. And Dave, back to you. I just wanted to, whereas we reached the 45-minute hour, I just wanted to make sure that before people had to leave that they understood that. But why don't we finish up?
Sure. Just to be respectful of time, the only thing I wanted to mention as a final note, well, in the absence of failure prevention, there's credit recovery. Quick data point on failure credit recovery in terms of the cost benefits, but I just want to say 36 states now have a statute or some type of law that doesn't allow seat time to be the requirement. And I think that we are starting to realize that it's about how if students learn it well, not necessarily when they learn it. So there's more information in the handout, but failure prevention and credit recovery kind of go hand in hand. And I think just metaphorically, I use the joke that when number 18 left Indianapolis, who was my quarterback, that wasn't the end of the world. Well, if a student doesn't meet proficiency in 18 weeks, doesn't mean they need another 18 weeks, that they could possibly learn it in 16 or 20 or 24, and sometimes students learn it early. So as a final note to my professor from Butler, he said this almost on a nightly basis, and I use this when we're talking failure prevention, credit recovery. Sometimes we have to react, but a professional is going to prepare and prevent. So I want to thank Bruce so much, colleague and friend, for sharing what he was able to do from Berkshire. There's some great information there, and on the site you can pick up that story, and I'm going to turn it back to Steve, and just really appreciate everybody giving up the time this Tuesday, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Dave and Bruce. Really good information. I want to remind everybody again about the Successful High School Framework Summit coming up next October in Dallas. This is where Dave and I and Jay and Tremaine will really have an opportunity to go very, very deep with the concepts that we talked about in this very brief 45-minute webinar. Don't forget about decision making for results in February and March, and data teams are number 1, number 2 top-selling seminars, and then we've got the Leaders Developing Leaders Summit in Las Vegas in April. So remember now, folks, Dave is good at sharing. If you saw something on some of these slides today that you have more questions about, please get a hold of him. And you have my email as well. We can divide this up and help you understand that a lot of great questions coming in. People really want to know how to use some of the strategies we just talked about, like the menu system and so forth. We can go deeper with that via email. So if you have any other questions or discussions that you want to see us cover next time, you can put that in your question function right now. We, again, want to thank everybody for staying with us. And just last reminder here about how to get a hold of Dave. You can get Dave at david.nagel@hmhco.com. And don't forget Kyle Helfrich is our National Sales Manager. He can help you if you'd like to see Dave in person and bring him onto your campus. So again, everybody, thanks so much for staying with us. And take this offline. Let us know if we can give you any more information. Have a great day now.